Something unusual is happening among the stars tonight. A faint streak of light, dubbed 3I Atlas, is moving through space. A visitor from outside our solar system, and it is triggering something we cannot yet understand. Let your mind relax, listen slowly, and let the light guide you into the story of the universe. In July 2025, at the Mauna Kea Observatory on Hawaii's summit, scientists spotted a faint dot of light, a data point so small that many thought it was just background noise. But a few nights later, the light became clearer and moved on a trajectory that did not fit any recorded pattern. In the silence of space, something shifted slightly. When the data were verified, it was discovered that the object was coming from the direction of the constellation Perseus at a speed so fast it could not have belonged to this solar system. It came from outside, from the void between stars, where all definitions of origin become vague. The name was given, 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object ever discovered. A traveler, crossing unimaginable distances, and now moving toward the Sunday. No one knows why it came, but with each passing second, its brightness increased as if waking up from a million-year slumber. In that moment, many astronomers felt something very strange. It felt like the universe had just responded, as if something out there was saying its first hello after billions of years of silence. 3I Atlas was more than just an object. It was the first signal in a series of things to come, a gentle invitation from a place we had never been before. From here, the door of the universe began to open, and humans, for the first time in a long time, stood before something completely new. Before we go any further into the void, let's leave a small sign, a like, a subscribe, as humans send signals into the universe to say, we're listening together. 3I Atlas is not a young object. It has been wandering through space for millions, maybe billions, of years before hitting the edge of the solar system. When its light was analyzed, simulations indicated that it may have been born from a collision between two icy planets on the edge of a distant star system where our sunlight has never reached. The fragment was knocked out of orbit, was sucked into the dark sea of interstellar space, and from there began its lonely journey. In interstellar space, there is no sound, no light, no life as we know it. There were only cold dust grains, thin plasma streams, and the background radiation left over from the Big Bang. 3I Atlas had passed through that region, in total darkness, at a nearly constant speed for millions of years. A journey without end and without witnesses. But the strange thing is, when it entered our star system, it did not appear to be dying. On the contrary, it acted as if it still had energy inside. Some scientists call this the paradox of vitality, because no natural object can maintain a stable energy after millions of years drifting in a vacuum. Maybe inside it, there is still a primordial core containing compounds we have never seen. Nickel, carbonyl, cyanide, all of it showed up in its light spectrum. Elements typically associated with orderly chemical reactions, like a self-regulating system. And if that were true, then 3I Atlas was not just a remnant of chaos, but the product of a sustained process. Theories began to emerge. Was it a fragment of a planet that once supported life? Or was it the remains of an artificial construct, a kind of ancient probe, sent from a civilization that vanished before Earth was formed? No one knew, but what was certain was, it had survived through impacts, radiation, and millions of years of solitude. Every time 3I Atlas gets closer, it not only gets closer to the sun, but it seems to bring humanity closer to a greater truth, that the universe still has much to reveal. Perhaps we are on the threshold of a new portal, and 3I Atlas is the first key that the universe has placed in the hands of humans. Before we go any further, let's imagine if you were looking at the sky tonight. What do you think 3I Atlas really is? An ancient comet or something made? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Who knows? Someone might be looking in the same direction as you. As 3I Atlas got closer to the sun, it began to change. It grew faster, its surface temperature increased, and then, at a distance of just under 2 astronomical units, something strange happened. It glowed 3 times brighter than predicted. No one knows why. Regular comets, when heated, eject water vapor and dust, creating a long tail that points away from the sunday. But 3I Atlas was different. Its light came not from reflection, but from active emission. Scientists began examining data from the James Webb Telescope. In the infrared spectrum, they detected regular bands of energy, a kind of oscillation with a nearly steady period. Like breathing, a comet has no rhythm. A natural body cannot keep a precise cycle of light emission down to the minute. So, what is controlling the rhythm? One hypothesis is that 3I Atlas may contain natural semiconductors, a type of compound that can store and release electromagnetic energy. If that is true, it would be the first time humanity has seen a body that acts like a giant plasma machine. But there is also another idea, that it is a sign of an artificial structure, a system that regulates optical reflections to keep the internal temperature stable. A Harvard physicist wrote, "No natural object could react with such precision, unless it was programmed to do so." When NASA released the new image from Perseverance, a diagonal line of light appeared in the Martian sky. It crossed the star trails at a near-perfect angle and moved faster than any satellite had ever recorded. Preliminary analysis showed that the direction matched the orbit of 3I Atlas. If the image was real, we had just witnessed an interstellar object in real time from another planet. And that's when everything changed. Mathematical models broke down. Brightness predictions became meaningless, and a new question arose. Is 3I Atlas waking up and not just reacting to the sun? Nobody has an answer, but as the radiation increases and its light begins to fluctuate more strongly, many in the scientific community believe the universe is sending a message, very small, but enough to make us stop. The sky is still dark, but perhaps, somewhere in the void, an ancient machine is opening its eyes. The sun's light is so strong, it obscures all optical data pointing toward the same coordinates. The world's largest telescopes, from Hawaii to Chile to South Africa, are temporarily blind. But on the other side, Mars is at its best position in years. For a few short weeks, it has become humanity's only eyes. Two European spacecraft, Mars Express and ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, are reoriented. They were originally designed to study the Martian atmosphere, but now their lenses are pointed outward, toward a bright spot in the middle of nowhere. In the same orbit, NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, with its ultra-high-resolution, high-rise camera, and the plasma-monitoring MAVEN satellite, are both starting to synchronize their data collection. From Earth, the control stations sent a series of small corrections with a delay of several minutes so that the entire system locked onto a single point in the Martian sky. What they found was incredible. The optical signal fluctuated regularly, and in the analysis spectrum, the emission lines showed not only ice evaporation, but also a rhythmic emission of carbon and CO2 like a modulated data pattern. No one dared to conclude, but the coincidence silenced many scientific groups, because if this was not noise, then perhaps 3I Atlas was emitting a response signal according to a rule never seen before in natural physics. Meanwhile, the images from Mars Express showed a faint blue halo surrounding the object, stretching for tens of thousands of kilometers. The halo wasn't fixed. It pulsated slowly, like a giant heartbeat in space. An ESA physicist said, "We used to believe that comets were chaotic machines, but this one seemed to be keeping a rhythm." The first data was encoded and transmitted back to Earth. It took nearly 17 minutes for each packet to travel that distance, and then several hours to decode, filter out noise, and reconstruct the image. The image emerged frame by frame, a dot of light trailing a thin trail of plasma, but not facing away from the sun like a comet, but parallel to it. The phenomenon forced a complete rewrite of aerodynamic models. No naturally occurring object could sustain such a state, unless the tail was not swept matter, but a controlled plasma field. In ESA's internal meetings, people started calling this phenomenon a coherence field, a kind of electromagnetic alignment that 3I Atlas might be creating to stabilize its own structure. And if that's true, then we're witnessing a form of organized activity in interstellar matter. In the coming weeks, Mars will continue to be the main observation station, and Earth will just wait, because in the light of the sun, the universe continues to open up, very slowly, but enough to change our understanding of life and matter's consciousness. There are moments in the universe so small that even before we notice them, they have already become history. The 17th of July, 2025, a faint point of light is recorded simultaneously by 3 independent observatories, in Hawaii, in the Canary Islands, and in South Africa. For the first few seconds, it is just a streak of data offset against the starry background. But then, speed measurements show something undeniable. This object is entering the solar system from outside. Identifying an interstellar object is not easy. It must be proven that its orbit is not bound by the sun's gravity. That is, it comes, passes, and then leaves forever. Astronomers call it a hyperbolic trajectory, an open orbit, a solitary, unreturning curve like the cold signature of extrastellar visitors. When the model was built, the results left no doubt. 3I Atlas was on a hyperbolic trajectory at a speed of nearly 68 kilometers per second, nearly twice the average speed of Halley's Comet. And so, in a single afternoon, its name was added to the short list of human history, after Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. 3 visitors, 3 bright dots in the endless stream of time. But among the 3 names, 3I, Atlas, was different, not just because it was brighter, but because it was reacting. The previous interstellar objects had passed silently, unchanging, without emission, and 3I, Atlas, was firing on its own. When NASA released the preliminary data, many scientists were initially skeptical. They thought it was just a coincidence of plasma phenomena or simply an error in the spectral measurements. But within a few days, 3I, Atlas's brightness doubled. The light oscillations repeated themselves in a precise cycle, not noise, not random. It was a signal, ordered behavior. From that moment, the entire astronomy community fell silent. No more easy affirmations. Only the question hung in the air. Are we observing a natural object or something made? When the data confirmed that 3I Atlas came from outside the solar system, the entire astronomy community almost stopped in a single breath. From NASA to ESA to the Harvard-Smithsonian Institution, laboratories lit up in the night. No one wanted to miss a phenomenon that might only happen once in centuries. But the more we observed, the heavier the silence became. Every measurement showed that 3I, Atlas, did not follow the familiar physical model. It glowed without reflection. It radiated without any apparent heat source. A scientist at Caltech put it succinctly in the meeting: there is no star that made it, and no laws that explain it. The scientific journals began to buzz. The first papers appeared, with the recurring title, Artificial Behavior, Unnatural Luminosity. Is this the first interstellar mechanism? Amidst it all, one thing became clear. 3I, Atlas, was more than just a discovery. It was a shock to scientific understanding. And perhaps, the universe has just given humanity another humbling lesson, that even what we thought we understood is just the beginning of a new door that has just opened. 3I Atlas was not born in our star system. Its hyperbolic orbit is the perfect trace of a galactic traveler, an open curve, never closing. When astronomers modeled it backward in time, its orbit stretched hundreds of light years, originating from the edge of the constellation Perseus, where a supernova exploded millions of years ago. It is possible that 3I, Atlas, was a fragment ejected from that event, gaining enough speed to escape the gravity of its parent star system, and then drifting on alone in interstellar space. Simulations show that it has passed through at least 7 stellar dust clumps, through countless magnetic fields and plasma waves, and still retained its basic shape. This is nearly impossible for a normal comet. A natural object that should have eroded, disintegrated, but 3I Atlas remained intact, like a structure designed to last a long time. As it approached the solar system, data from James Webb showed that the surface temperature steadily increased, but not beyond the threshold of material decay. It adapted to sunlight, like it knew how to avoid being burned. In the scientific community, people began to call it by a simple nickname, the survivor, the survivor. Perhaps its journey was not a random drift, but a programmed path, started far, far away, and arrived here, just when humans had the technology to see it. From its first measurements, 3I Atlas forced scientists to reconsider the definition of natural celestial body. It glowed periodically, regulating its brightness and direction as if responding to solar energy. No comet had ever been recorded to behave like this. Under infrared lenses, its light spectrum revealed many unusual lines. CO too far outstripped water, and compounds never seen in nature appeared. It was not a sign of melting ice, but rather a controlled energy reaction. In many research labs, the phrase synthetic behavior, artificial behavior, began to appear in internal notes. Even more strangely, when 3I Atlas was exposed directly to the strongest solar radiation, it did not disintegrate like a typical comet. On the contrary, the plasma around it is denser, more stable, as if absorbing energy to strengthen itself. Some experts call it the energy reversal effect. As the object gets closer to the sun, it gets stronger instead of weaker. No one dares to claim that 3I Atlas is artificial, but it seems that classical physics is no longer enough to explain it. Every new observation opens up another layer of the unknown, and perhaps this is the moment when science touches the boundary of belief, where we must suspend all definitions to listen to something that speaks in the language of energy, not words. The more we look, the more we realize that 3I Atlas's orbit is not completely random. When models are reconstructed, it doesn't move in a perfectly straight line, but rather makes small, very regular, very precise adjustments, like it's leveling itself out to maintain a certain orientation. ESA data shows that every time the solar radiation spikes, the object changes its reflection angle by a small fraction, reducing the amount of energy it absorbs. It's like a spacecraft adjusting itself to avoid burning up. A natural object can't do that. But if it's a system, if it has a sensing and response mechanism inside, then it makes perfect sense. We can't prove 3I Atlas is conscious, an ESA physicist said in an internal report, but it behaves as if it knows where it is. The phrase spread faster than the data. Many called it the aware traveler, the traveler who knows where he is going. When NASA compared the Hubble data, slight changes in direction were detected, but always converging to one point: the inner solar system. No signs of drift, no collision, no instability. It was as if 3I Atlas was following a predetermined path, calculated to take advantage of the gravity of planets as natural accelerators. A trip without deviation, a flight with purpose. And then, in a closed-door meeting of the international research team, a scientist posed a question that everyone silently avoided. If it was sent, to whom? No one answered, because sometimes there are questions that don't need words, just silence to acknowledge that we have just touched something beyond the limits of human imagination. The universe may not have a purpose, but 3I Atlas seems to have one, and that makes it not just a visitor, but a message on the move. 3I Atlas is hurtling along on a curve both beautiful and dangerous at the same time, at 60 kilometers per second, and still accelerating. With each passing minute, it traverses a distance 10 times the radius of Earth, a tiny speck of dust, but with more kinetic energy than anything man has ever created. If you're listening right now, please leave a little sign, a like, or a comment, because we're all looking in the same direction, where a tiny object is passing through fire and light. As it plunges into the solar system, its speed increases to 68 kilometers per second. For each AU, an astronomical unit, or about 150 million kilometers, it cuts through space in less than 3 weeks. And when it reaches its closest distance to the Sun, a point called perihelion, it will be just over a third of the Earth-Sun distance. There, the radiation is hundreds of times stronger than the light we receive on Earth. Air, water, or any other matter would disintegrate in seconds. But 3I, Atlas keeps moving. Steady, steady, as if it knows what lies ahead. On a three-dimensional model, its trajectory is tilted slightly relative to the ecliptic plane by about 16 degrees. That angle, called orbital inclination, is considered a signature of its origin. It reveals its starting direction, and sometimes the history of collisions that have pushed the object out of its original orbit. With 3I Atlas, that angle points toward the constellation Perseus, a region of dense stardust where unusually powerful energy waves have been recorded. From Earth, when observed through a telescope, it is no longer just a static point of light. Its light stretches, trembling in the plasma field, creating shimmering filaments, like threads of light stretched across space. An astronomer in Chile wrote, "Looking at it through a telescope feels like watching time, something untouchable, but passing right before your eyes." The space around 3I Atlas ripples. The surrounding plasma oscillates slowly, each time pulsing to coincide with its energy emission. The feeling, when the image appears on the radar screen, is like watching a living being breathe. And perhaps, on a deeper level, it is alive, in a way that physics has never defined. The people who operate the James Webb Telescope say that 3I Atlas's light is like a stream with memory, not scattered, not chaotic, but moving in its own rhythm, an orbit that is not repetitive, but full of purpose. And in that moment, humans realize the universe may be vast, but it is also delicate enough to write perfect curves. 3I Atlas, traveling at nearly 70 kilometers per second, is carving a line in the sky that we cannot yet fully read. An object is rewriting the definition of natural orbits. As 3I Atlas drew closer to the Sun, a thin layer of plasma began to surround it, giving off a pale blue glow like living steam. It wasn't just the reaction of heated ice. It was a self-organizing flow of energy. Webb's sensors picked up regular electromagnetic oscillations, like a body regulating its temperature. The radiation from the Sun bounced back, but instead of causing it to disintegrate, 3I Atlas absorbed the energy and then re-emitted it in a series of symmetrical plasma waves. It was as if it were conversing with its central star, in a language that existed only in energy. Its brightness was not explosive but steady, as if there was some internal control mechanism, keeping everything on the edge between balance and chaos. In that moment, 3I Atlas was no longer a cold, inert object, but a functioning energy system at the center of fire, light, and nothingness. Through the observatory's lenses, 3I Atlas was no longer just a point of light. It became a living, moving band, pulsing through the void, pulsing with thousands of thin, long streaks of plasma like filaments of light. Astronomers say, watching it is like seeing a glowing vein of the universe. The light was not static. It stretched, pulsated, and sometimes flashed so brightly that one thought the object was emitting a conscious signal. On the display screen, The blue gradually faded to silver, then faded, then brightened again, forming a series of pulses as regular as a heartbeat. All humans could do was watch and take in. No one said anything. No one dared to breathe heavily, because that light seemed to be looking back. In a rare moment, the universe is no longer far away. In the vastness of space, humans and objects are separated by only a light signal, a reflection a billionth of a second slower. On one side is a lens, on the other is fire, and in the middle is something we have never understood, the life of light. Amid all the numbers, velocity, trajectory, energy, what silenced people the most was not the data, but the image of a tiny speck of dust rushing straight into the center of the solar storm. No shield, no sound, just light, where everything that had ever existed was gone. And in that light, 3i, Atlas continued its journey, calm as if it knew. It was born to walk through fire. On Earth, hundreds of scientists sat before the data screens, each looking at the same object, but seeing different emotions. Some were curious, some were afraid, some were silent, as if they had just witnessed an ancient cosmic ritual. A young researcher at JPL wrote in his diary, "It felt like watching a soul pass through the light." The saying spread silently, because it said what everyone was thinking, but no one dared to say. 3i, Atlas was no longer just a physical object. It became a mirror of humanity's thirst for understanding and its insignificance in the face of the fire of the stars. The space surrounding 3i, Atlas, was now filled with energy. Plasma arcs curved around its body, drawing lines of light as thin as silver threads. Each a slice of time, a piece of the universe's memory. From a distance, hundreds of millions of kilometers away, humans saw only a small dot moving, but inside that dot of light was the entire complexity of modern physics. A celestial body that refused to yield to orbit did not fall into classical limits. It did not spin, did not stray, did not break. It slid smoothly as if guided by some invisible hand of nature or of intelligence. When the last sunlight reflected off that layer of plasma, it formed a perfect curve, redrawing the concept of natural orbit in human thinking. No longer closed ellipses, no longer limited by gravitational calculations, but an orbit of will, where energy and space become one, where the celestial body continues to write its own definition. In the silence of space, the universe seems to be whispering a very small sentence. Everything can change, even the laws that were once considered absolute. And 3i, Atlas, is living proof of that. If you're listening to these words, just imagine a day when Earth can't look up at the sky. We'll have to rely on another planet to observe the universe for us. And if that thought sounds strange to you, leave a little comment below, because that's exactly what's happening right now. As 3i Atlas plunges into the sun's bright side, telescopes on Earth begin to lose signal. The optical radiation is so intense that every image is swallowed up in blinding white light. Earth becomes temporarily blind, and in that moment, Mars opens its eyes. And there is a plated, was finally would part from the distant red orbit, Europe's Mars Express and ExoMars observatories, NASA's MRO and MAVEN, and China's Tianwen-1, the UAE's Hope, all turned their lenses away from the planet towards a bright spot shining in the void. For a few short days, every artificial eye around Mars was looking at the same coordinates, where 3i, Atlas, was passing. There were steth people, some get it the wording visuals, grad, and the wormen. For the first time in history, humans were observing the universe not from Earth, but from another planet. Each reflected light beam passed through Mars, and then returned to Earth millions of kilometers later, as if the two worlds were looking together at a common mystery. There was no distance, only planetary cooperation. In the crucian, in the cry made for you cry, in the cry made it from down, data began to trickle in small, heavy packets, each one part of the story unfolding between the Sun and 3i, Atlas. And far away, Mars quietly became the first witness to a phenomenon that could change the way humans understand our own solar system. In a thin orbit around Mars, 5 of humanity's spacecraft simultaneously point toward a common point, a small patch of light passing through the Sun's fiery zone. ESA's Mars Express turns on its Aurora watching mode. ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter fine-tunes its infrared sensors. NASA's MRO turns on its high-rise camera at maximum magnification. MAVEN collects plasma data, and the UAE's Tianwen-1 and HOPE capture the blue glow around the object. And some of the Kamer, the people of Look Self, each signal, each data packet from each satellite is sent back to Earth's control center, assembling like pieces of a giant puzzle. An interplanetary observation network, maintained by minutes of radio delay, still operates in astonishing synchrony. Remended, and the problems of then, the remended, and the bleddity of the kind. For a rare moment, all of humanity's technology, from 5 nations, 5 independent systems, looks in the same direction. There are no more boundaries, only a unity of knowledge. And in the center of that picture, Twazi, ATLS floats, silently, but brightly, as if aware that hundreds of eyes are watching it from a distant world. The first image appeared at 2:17 UTC. It wasn't a bright frame, just a long dot of light cutting across the starry background like a thin trail of smoke. But in that small dot, all the excitement of humanity lay hidden. If you want to start not a cas in Didacus and want to start not a cas, the high-rise camera on the MRO spacecraft was the first to clearly capture the motion of 3i Atlas. The resolution of the image was less than a few meters per point, but it was enough to make out a faint blue glow surrounding the object. The halo wasn't fixed, it oscillated slightly, inflating, contracting, like a living being breathing. Not now, worgs friendo. Not now, worgs friendodes of very one. NASA scientists call that moment frame 0, the first frame of a conversation between two worlds. On the monitor, 3i, Atlas's light reflected off the thin Martian atmosphere, forming a gentle curve, like a bridge of light, connecting the red planet to the vastness of space. Things said, and midi of this spart, the plows and from the Dupton from this 5. The next image, from the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, showed unusual spectra. CO2 was 8 times more abundant than water, and a previously unrecorded energy band. Between cyanide and nickel, no one dared to say for sure, but the data suggested that the reactions inside 3i, Atlas, were not random, but clearly cyclical, a form of self-regulation that natural matter could hardly sustain. And hems to goodness that, and day, from Mars orbit, each image sent back carried an unusual stillness. No sound, no interruptions, just light spreading evenly, then fading into darkness. An ESA scientist noted in the report, "We are not just seeing an object, we are seeing how it exists. It the bearing barricane." and they're bearing Goodno. And in that moment, Mars truly became Earth's surrogate eyes, recording for humanity. The first portrait of an interstellar visitor. After the first images were transmitted, Mars Express continued to collect low-frequency spectral data. In the thousands of wave trains, analysts discovered something no one expected: a perfect rhythm. The raps of Sumri 1/2 of Sakruva, the raps of Sumri 1/2 of Sighted and the Wang. The cycle lasted exactly 33 seconds, steady throughout 3 hours of observation. No natural phenomenon could produce such a regular rhythm. Solar wind, plasma noise, radiation, all are chaotic, impossible to repeat so precisely. Yet, 3I Atlas continued to glow in that rhythm, as if sending out an orderly series of pulses, ad in the sky. While the parrot solution, and does it immense, when NASA, ESA, and JAXA compared the data, they found that the 33-second rhythm appeared simultaneously in both the light spectrum and the electromagnetic plasma oscillations. That means the object is not just glowing, it is also radiating energy. They tag yans, and which they racket to a zak, and they won another come by acket. The Chazerwek and Ward, they won mines. They won, an ESA engineer said in the meeting. If this is a signal, it is not for us. But we heard it. From that moment, every observatory began recording the oscillations, as if afraid of missing any sound in that gap. And the business in Delbinov, many thought it might be a coincidence, a random resonance between plasma and light. But when the final check was made, the oscillations were still in the same rhythm. 33 seconds, not a thousandth of a difference. With that the quarter to our forters and the kais, that the raws, they came the timais, with the quarters orson that a quarters in the cord. And so, in the ESA data archive, a note was added under the label 3I, Atlas, Mars observation log. Trezechi shi 3-second light cycle detected. Origin unknown. Controlled emission not excluded. Delayed. And then ran Breck 5. And the Ludigli the no sen. And won both US. No one dared to call it intelligent. No one dared to write the word artificial. But the silence in the report speaks for itself. When the last light cycle was recorded, the Martian sky was still covered in a thin layer of red dust. The satellites orbiting the planet silently still pointed their lenses at the region of space where 3I Atlas disappeared. There was no new signal, only a faint static noise in the receiver. But for humans, that moment meant much more than data. The backdid from our God. In the backdid forgether. In Bolivity. The backdid from our God. For the first time in history, humanity was not looking at the universe from Earth. That gaze was taken by another world. A planet we had once considered only a destination in our dreams. And from that perspective, we saw 3I, Atlas. We saw the sun, and we saw ourselves. Small, fragile, but knowing how to look together in the same direction. One the called is in the clues, one the one the called is on. As the data were sent back to the control center in Madrid, a scientist whispered, "This is the first time 2 planets have observed a single object." The words were later printed on the first page of the report, a reminder that science is more than just numbers. It is a shared view of worlds, a moment when curiosity transcends the distance between planets. But Eothavishes and Rajay, and not of to wider within minder, and please sumward en marrow, work the side, to mine master, and not of the play. 3I. Atlas has passed beyond Mars, but its last image remains, a faint streak of light arching between the stars, like the outline of a question that has never been answered. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing the universe has ever taught us, that sometimes it is in the inexplicable that we find the deepest meaning of existence. At first, 3I Atlas was just a tiny blip, sitting at the edge of telescope data. But then, in a few short days, it began to shine 3 times brighter than predicted. The phenomenon is called a luminosity anomaly, an abnormality in brightness, a fluctuation that stopped the entire scientific community in its tracks. In the causer dead nanef, dozer foresight, and the capure, an object's brightness is measured on a scale called magnitude. The smaller the number, the brighter the light. Comets typically change only slowly based on their position relative to the sun, but 3I Atlas jumped 2 notches overnight, from magnitude 14 to 12, a jump too large and too intentional to be natural. It didn't just brighten, it responded, one JPL expert exclaimed. And so, theories abound. Some believe the glow is a reflected plasma caused by ions in the object's crust interacting with the solar wind. Others believe its structure contains a stable ionized layer, allowing it to absorb energy and re-emit it in a cyclical rhythm. But there are also those who remain silent, because the precision of its brightness makes any physical explanation seem tenuous. The Sat of Lenkinins are a Bledderamamet, minute, and 2343, a celestial body that is not just getting brighter. It seems to be waking up. Each burst of light is like a breath, slow, deep, with the rhythm of a living being regaining consciousness after a million-year slumber. When NASA released the brightness graph, the curve was not chaotic like a comet, but smooth, even, and self-regulating. It was as if 3I Atlas were learning to shine. Thank you for watching. And with 3066, it is not the graces. In the observational records, there is a short line handwritten in the margin by an engineer at the Mauna Kea Observatory. If this is natural light, then we may never have known what natural is. The 17 meter desired, the basis the ride, and from that night on, every lens pointed to the same spot, where an object in the middle of nowhere was silently rewriting the limits of light. The unusual brightness of 3I Atlas has led scientists to consider 3 major hypotheses. None of them is comprehensive, but each opens up a new understanding of how matter behaves in interstellar space. Please the center white, the crease from work from mind for 1. The first hypothesis, reflective plasma. Accordingly, the outer layer of 3I Atlas acts as an energy mirror, reflecting sunlight thanks to the surrounding dense magnetic and ion fields. This plasma layer can increase the brightness many times over, without the need for additional internal sources. But there is still something strange. The brightness fluctuates regularly, not chaotically like natural reflection. The spescoted chowns and from Morse 3, the quest the nose. The second hypothesis, stable ionization structure. Some experts believe that 3I Atlas has a core containing reactive metals, like nickel or cobalt, which combine with carbonyls to form a self-energizing ionization membrane. This allows it to absorb photons and re-emit them in an orderly fashion. If true, it would be the first object in history to show signs of self-regulating its energy in the open space environment. The bean of the fourth day, the dune of the Sioux. The day was starred out in Kate Des. The third hypothesis, unknown physical reactions. This is the most daring approach, suggesting that a process similar to weak nuclear reactions exists in the core of 3I, Atlas, but is held in check by a crystal structure or quantum field. This effect could explain its unusually stable and long-lasting brightness, but also raises the question, if so, who or what created this structure? This masted nines from the player. Whatever the answer, 3I Atlas is doing something that all known laws fail to predict. It glows without burning. It radiates energy without losing mass. An object that straddles the line between physics and mystery, as if the universe itself were trying something new. The closer it got to the sun, the more different the light of 3I Atlas became. It not only increased in intensity, it changed the way people felt. No one considered it a mere reflection anymore. Its light had a rhythm. It breathed. There was something in the way it oscillated that suggested a living being waking up from a millennia-long slumber. This is for the breatha that would not inframeric freshen, and the land of the priver while, and metterly from the giluation of the breatha to the deshen and the while, in successive frames, each time the object shone brightly, the surrounding plasma expanded, then contracted very slowly, like the rising and falling of a breathing chest. Visual observers called this phenomenon by a simple name, heartbeat of light. There Sibyl two Selvin rel days of the Tannel Selvin seen Selvin runder Selvin, and ed be days as to Wanadeses of the Tannel Solvin 2000 runders, and the Selvin runders, and other Sibyl two Selvin runders, and their Sibyl two Selvin 1 days of the runders, and 1 days as Perry, although no one dared to say it out loud. In their hearts, everyone had the same feeling, that 3I Atlas was reacting, sensing the sunlight, and using that energy to wake up. Esther to know now again, because Z Streen 4, an engineer in the ESA control room, recorded in his diary, "It's not light, it's a behavior, and that behavior seems to be learning." No one knew whether this was a physical reaction or a form of evolution in the energy structure of interstellar matter. But one thing was certain. From the moment 3I Atlas lit up, all old hypotheses about the limits of natural celestial bodies became obsolete. Light was no longer just the result of a reaction. It became an expression of will. When 3I Atlas reaches its peak brightness, it is no longer an object to be observed. It becomes a language, a way the universe speaks to itself. And this is this, within water to a glest, and the supported is not often in gret, and water distrews, and made us the tension, and right, and within, and est, and water, and within. The light doesn't just radiate outward, it interacts, reflects, modulates, like it's transmitting information. Each pulse is a sentence, each change in frequency a pause. Physicists call this structured emission, but in the silence of the control rooms, everyone understands they're seeing something, like thought, but with energy. In that it's.com, there's no longer a boundary between science and philosophy, because when an object knows how to organize its light, it has entered another plane of existence, where light isn't just for seeing, but for expressing. Est, Dmi, an astronomer wrote in his diary, "Maybe we are so used to thinking that only humans can speak, but sometimes the universe speaks too, just with light." And as 3I Atlas faded from view, one realized something simple. Light is not the end of darkness, but the way the universe tells itself. The 2nd of October 2025. On the surface of Mars, the sky is cold and clear, the Perseverance rover's camera begins recording a 9-minute series of nighttime images. The original goal was just to track the movement of the stars to calibrate the camera's orientation. But in that series of frames, something that did not belong to the Martian sky appeared. This breast and wise that happen 80 over homes. Any front. And deportated in the place. And deportated. And cappen. And deportated. And cappen. And calm. A thin streak of light crossing the starry background and then disappearing after just a few seconds. Not following any satellite, no matching data in NASA's celestial tracking calendar, and certainly not a cosmic ray because the light was continuous and curved. This meant moments left in the night it ask of ride and ask to a favor. When analysts reviewed the images, each frame showed a steady movement of the streak of light, as if an object was speeding, cutting through the thin upper atmosphere of Mars. Its orbital angle coincided eerily with the direction 3I Atlas was predicted to pass at the same time. No one wanted to believe it was a coincidence. They got URC, and they had and Elvis, the not caster, and their C-Dod. The data was sent back to JPL Mission Control. The image processing lab spent 3 days verifying it. Spectrographers found no signs of tampering and could not identify the source of the light. The light was not reflected from the sun. It was self-emitting, with a spectrum tilted toward turquoise, exactly as James Webb had observed from 3I Atlas a few weeks earlier. There were step beyond the problems from mother to the third, man explained ignine, and cast off URI. But then, everything went quiet. No announcement, no press conference. Not a single line of press release was published. There was only one small file, Sol Elif Madiam Tishim Vishtaim, Night Sky Sequence Tasha, stored in NASA's raw database, without captions, without explanation. There was no subsextant this, but it has from Milbidusis, a researcher who had worked on the image processing team said quietly in a closed-door interview. We weren't asked to hide. We were just asked to be quiet. Very hes for staging one, the wild duar one, that mine den with pitted stuazeri around. And perhaps, the universe sometimes doesn't need affirmations. There are pieces of evidence that don't need to be spoken aloud. They just wait for someone patient enough to listen. After the night of October 2, when Perseverance recorded the mysterious light, every observing system gradually fell into a data void. 3I Atlas disappeared from every telescope as if it had never existed. Body set, and the do not free, the time's eye. For the next 2 months, observatories on Earth, Mars, and even Maven received no reflections, no light, no plasma waves, no optical oscillations. Everything was black. At NASA, weekly reports contained only one line, no visual reacquisition. Signal loss persists. The be denoted, and one this of nigh. Some scientists believe the object burned up in the heliosphere, where solar radiation is so intense it breaks down all molecular structures. Others were silent. Because if 3I Atlas had really been obliterated, why was the overall energy in that region still slightly elevated? TESS and Solar Orbiter both recorded a small oscillation in the sun's ultraviolet radiation, repeating every 18 hours. A familiar cycle, the same rhythm 3I Atlas had emitted before it disappeared. One required that the data were not released. Instead, NASA issued a faint statement. Observation window closed due to solar interference. But to those who had been watching from the beginning, That silence spoke louder than any statement. This thing's sex lunars, this care of self a self phyllis, and is a paces, and face the tax. The universe, it seemed, was holding back its own story. And 3I, Atlas, the object that once forced light to change the way it behaved, now remains only a glowing blank in human memory. After nearly 2 months of silence, on December 9, a strange signal appeared in the test data. At first, it was just a small oscillation in the infrared, but as the data increased in resolution, people realized it was a streak of light moving in the opposite direction of the sun's orbit. And pence of Yuanche, no one dared to confirm it, but the coordinates matched perfectly with the position where 3I, Atlas, should have reappeared after its time hiding behind the Sunday. The optical signal fluctuated slightly, then stabilized. According to the familiar 33-second cycle, 3I, Atlas was back. There were Moved and Sedan, and of the Problemant, and 12 the Dublin, then of the Tenor Formant, no longer shining brightly as before. Its light was now dimmer, as gentle as a breath after a long awakening. But the strangest feature was, its brightness did not come from reflection, but from active emission. The surface temperature was lower than what was needed to produce that light. And their 2I day, 2I day, 2I day, 2I day. In the ESA control room, everyone stood around the screen, silently watching the steady flickering light. No one said anything, but everyone understood that what they were witnessing was no longer in the realm of nature. A NASA researcher wrote in the report, it was out of sight for 2 months, but when it returned, it still remembered how to breathe. Nodded. R has sever. No one knew where 3I Atlas had gone, or what had happened in the solar flare. But one thing was clear. It did not return the same. The frequency of the light changed. The energy intensity became more stable, as if the object had been restructured. To the max size, duor duthen. To the way due condal. With a now and of the macken. They do a guestiveness with a macken, and don't now. And in the winter sky of December, 3I, Atlas moved silently through the darkness, slowly, calmly, like a being that had just completed its own trial by fire. That no main doxed of the down, that no blown. There are returns that do not need a bang, just a flash of light, enough to remind humanity that silence does not mean disappearance. When 3I Atlas's signal reappeared in early December, observatories around the world sounded the alarm. Teams that had paused monitoring during the blackout immediately rebooted their systems. NASA, ESA, and JAXA servers lit up again after 2 months of sleep. The Argol Braid 2 Abidsho, so Sabidshousing, and the Braid 2 Slukers, and did not know strain. No one expected this. They thought 3I Atlas had disintegrated, but instead, it returned with a more stable light, a more precise signal, and a steady, controlled power. A Caltech expert exclaimed, "It didn't survive the sun. It outlived it, and melted strong lime, dime, and ideas." Scientific forums were flooded with analysis. Emergency meetings were held in Pasadena, Darmstadt, and Tokyo. Astronomers began using words rarely used in research: adaptive behavior, reconfiguration, and energy retention. These terms suggested that the object was not just reacting, but adapting to the extreme conditions. This plan the rather too little light, one to extrainted not a Kennedy. The strangest thing, however, was not the brightness, but the synchronization of the data. At the same time, 3 different telescopes, TESS, Webb, and Subaru, recorded fluctuations in light that were almost perfectly in phase. It was as if 3i Atlas were actively broadcasting in all directions at once. The silence of the past 2 months suddenly took on a different meaning. Was it preparing for this? They won that with packed exapper, and with packs, the packs out up relevant. And one they won does it. NASA kept its guard up. No announcement, no denial. Just a brief report. 3i Atlas successfully reacquired. No further comment. But internally, many researchers described the moment as a shock to the spirit, because what they were seeing wasn't the return of an object, but the continuation of an intelligence in the form of light. There is like races, in cavers, there is not houses, within blue from the discream. From there, the nights of observation began again. The telescopes turned in their usual direction, and this time, the world knew they weren't just looking at a point of light. They were looking at something that returned. When 3i Atlas reappeared, it brought not only light, but also a question. Will humans have the patience to remember what they witnessed? One side 100 best. Okay, in those 2 months of silence, many people forgot. Newsletters stopped updating. Forums cooled down. Curiosity, which had once burned when 3i Atlas was shining, was replaced by the old habits of the noisy world. But then, the light returned, still with a regular 33-second rhythm as a reminder that the universe has not disappeared. It is just waiting for someone to look. The scraph, our people are. Scientists call this a reappearance anomaly, a phenomenon of non-linear recurrence. An object leaves the field of view, then reappears without changing its structure, as if time had not passed for it. But beyond the physical aspect, it is like a cosmic test of human memory. Can we still believe what we saw when there is no evidence to confirm it? In the brief 4-7 dead, the for the Berngers pofer the wise R's, and the brief for the par, and perhaps that is what makes 3i Atlas so special. It not only challenges science, but also challenges the loyalty of memory. An object leaves in silence, then returns to ask humans a wordless question. When the light disappears, do you still remember that it ever existed? And forsooth, I have supplied in one, then be one with cod and four. In the December sky, their 3i Atlas passes silently through the darkness, leaving no sound, only a small ray of light trembling in the void. But for those who are still watching, that ray of light is not just data. It is a memory returned, a reminder that sometimes what matters most is not what we see, but what we choose not to forget. On the 21st of October 2025, the Sun, Earth, and 3i Atlas were in a straight line. This phenomenon is called a solar conjunction, the moment when the Sun stands between humans and objects, completely obscuring their view. All telescopes, from Hubble to TESS, were forced to pause because no optical system could penetrate that sea of fire. In that moment, all of humanity seemed to lose its eyesight. They another step than the come down the sever things, the graded shot or nother, to mine day two, with a graded shot or nother. In the stat, the paradox is, we have photographed a black hole 55 million light-years away, but are blind to an object near Mars. At that distance, only a few 100 million kilometers, the light of the Sun is still enough to wipe out all data. Modern science, no matter how great, still bows before the brilliance of the central star. An ESO researcher wrote in the report, "It was like standing in a room full of light and trying to find a burning candle somewhere. and the anyone. During the conjunction, every observatory was left to wait. No more measurements, no more signals. There was only the passing of time and the hope that 3i Atlas was still intact on the other side of the light. And then say 35 Minono Cryats and created Tukul to the Nevers. When everything quieted down, the only sound in the control centers was the hum of air conditioning and cooling fans. No one spoke. No one wanted to break the silence, because perhaps this silence itself was part of the universe. The beauty of waiting, and fermenter, mataracumber, tenribin. In a world where everything is rushed, people forget that science also needs silence to listen. Because not all discoveries come from action, but sometimes from patience in the void. And on that day of the sun's eclipse, the universe seemed to be teaching humanity just one small thing, that to understand the light, first, we must learn to accept the darkness. After the conjunction, when the sun closed its light door, every observatory on Earth fell into the longest silence in the history of tracking an interstellar object. No more oscillations, no more feedback signals, just zeros, repeating over and over again with each acquisition cycle. It is a one small 2 months, a time too short for the universe, but too long for humans. In the control centers, hundreds of engineers were still on night shifts, still sitting in front of black screens with only the status line. No new data. The world was still busy with its own noise. But in that small room containing the cold receivers, the universe seemed to speak in silence. And Kels Fermone, some people called this period the data dead period. But for some astronomers, it was the purest moment of science. For in the silence, they realized that waiting was also a form of observation. A researcher at Mauna Kea wrote, "We no longer see the light, but that does not mean it no longer exists. Perhaps, at this very moment, 3i Atlas is teaching us that the universe never dies, it just stops responding. Des duar, des corsi, night after night, night after night, meaningless records are saved. But line by line, file by file, is proof that humans are still patiently staring into the void. And in the distance, among the sea of plasma and sunlight, 3i Atlas still drifts, silent as an unspoken thought. In the midst of those seemingly empty months, a tiny thing began to appear in the solar orbiter data. No one noticed it right away, because it was just a very faint oscillation, a ripple of light that repeated regularly in the sun's deep ultraviolet. That Revander was Opham, the four warns, one the rose, and very one the moral. Every 18 hours, the energy amplitude increased slightly, then decreased, then repeated with incredible precision. It wasn't noise. It wasn't a sensor error. The oscillation was steady, as if it came from a hidden breathing rhythm inside the sun's giant plasma. Physicists initially thought it was a natural resonance, but when they compared the data, they discovered that the frequency matched the 33-second rhythm 3i Atlas had emitted before it disappeared. A silent repetition, and the subsefer of pieces sever in mechanics as severage, and the lever credit is sever, with you lively with incumbents of the rument and dime. Some joked that the sun was answering, but behind that soft remark, there was a strange feeling. Could 3i Atlas not only withstand the heat of the central star, but also leave a trace inside it? A small pulse of energy, like a copy of itself. This is freighted. The Brennick the 1 re 6 Breg 2 19. From then on, all the silence became different. The silence was no longer empty. It had a rhythm, a breath, a cycle, as if the sun was remembering its encounter with the visitor from afar. An ESA physicist whispered in the recording of the meeting, "If this is just a coincidence, it is the most beautiful coincidence I have ever seen." And now one hymns from Prive to that covenant office. To the man agrees Prive hymns are one. And so, in the sea of static data, a very small ray of hope flashed again. No one knew if it was a response, but everyone felt that the universe was still talking to them, just in a language slower than light. Silence is not a void. It is part of the language of the universe, where sound pauses for light to speak, and light pauses for humans to learn to listen. And the 7 dime, with 13 begrauther, of the day bullright forsen, in those 2 months, all the data fell silent. But at that moment, science was brought back to its most primitive form, waiting for a signal, waiting for a oscillation, waiting for a small piece of evidence that we are still on the right track. No applause, no declarations, just humans sitting quietly in the vastness of space with a fragile belief that what they are pursuing is still out there somewhere. Loder Dappen, an old astronomer in Chile, once said in a meeting, "If we cannot accept silence, we will never hear the voice of the universe." The words were written on a large board in the control room, and they remained there throughout the 3I Atlas disappearance. A reminder that science is not just about proof, but also about patience in the face of the unknown. The gested is late my brachus, many frus. The gested is latidus. As everyone left their final shift in November, the screens were still on, flashing with flat lines of data. No one turned them off, not out of hope, but out of respect. Respect for the silence of the universe, and respect for themselves for having been patient enough to wait. An hour, another one. And then, as a gentle reward, the light finally returned. But by then, no one expected the noise. There was only silence, calm, complete, like the universe thanking those who had the patience to look at it when it was no longer visible. On October 33, Atlas entered the most dangerous part of its journey. The distance between the object and the sun was just 0.36 AU, less than 54 million kilometers, where the heat and radiation were so intense that they could warp the orbit of a small planet. There was no clear optical signal, only a brief flare in the infrared data, like a final heartbeat before it melted into the plasma. ESA scientists call this moment by a simple name, perihelion. But for them, it was more than just an orbital parameter. It was a fateful moment of survival. Commenber do thing, and there one subunny fries, and all work. In that distance, every possibility was on the table. Structural breakdown, complete vaporization, sudden flare-ups, or a change in direction away from the solar system. Simulations ran for days, but none of them predicted it perfectly. Some thought 3I Atlas would shatter into hundreds of pieces, like the comet Ison that disintegrated in 2013. Others thought its hollow structure might help dissipate heat, allowing it to survive the solar flare. And the calm live the plains, 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 and the plains, and the plains, and the plains, and the plains. Meanwhile, ESA's JUICE mission, which was on its way to the Jupiter system, temporarily adjusted its viewing angle, recording faint plasma fluctuations around the sun for 3 days straight. They found no debris, but they did see a gently curved streak of light running against the direction of the solar wind. not a reflection, but a deliberate movement. The Kanother Satter people decapitated 9, the Coles not 10, and 2 4. The space around the sun then resembled a giant plasma forge. Layers of light swept across the sensors, bright, fierce, and alive. In the midst of this chaos, 3I Atlas looked like a starseed testing its survival, a fragment of interstellar memory passing through the scorching wind of the sun god. No one knew if it would survive, but everyone agreed with Professor Loeb's words, repeated many times in the last meeting of the month. If it survives, we will no longer call it a comet. When 3I Atlas entered the extreme radiation zone, all predictions pointed to one outcome: disintegration. No comet has ever passed within 0.36 AU and emerged intact. The ultraviolet radiation, the pressure of the solar wind, and the enormous magnetic field surrounding the heliosphere would be enough to crush any structure. But in the series of spectral images taken by Solar Orbiter, researchers discovered something incredible. 3I Atlas's brightness did not decrease. It simply changed color, from turquoise to pale yellow, and back to blue, as if the object's surface were adapting to the heat. This is Farm 1's for Menor Copper Cod. This is for the side. When the telescopes recorded infrared data, the temperature of the surrounding region soared to more than 2,000 degrees Celsius. But 3I Atlas's glowing core remained stable. There was no sign of decay, no significant change in orbital geometry. That led many physicists to rewrite the model of radiant energy. Because if 3I Atlas were a normal comet, it would have evaporated all its ice in a matter of minutes. Instead, it stood, in silence, as if it knew how to defend itself. This band, this passband, the passband with a little mend, the tankula, the tancha with a now wrapper, the lue, the passband. A new hypothesis has been put forward. The surface of 3I Atlas may contain a layer of reflective plasma, similar to a natural energy shield. When heat and magnetic fields are applied, this plasma reflects back, creating a cyclic absorption radiation effect, helping to maintain internal energy balance. If that is true, then this is not just a passive object, but a self-regulating structure. In the Pastingon one, without Ander of Mill and Danikos, in that moment, among the sun's sea of plasma, 3I Atlas, like an ancient star fragment, was proving that survival is not just about biology. Sometimes, life can be about the persistence of structure, the memory of matter, the instinct to not disintegrate. And when it drifted out of the danger zone, the light path remained intact, unbroken. A miracle, a proof that perhaps the universe also knows how to protect the things it wants to keep. As 3I Atlas passed perihelion and began to move away from the sun, a series of strange signals began to appear on its instruments. 3 missions, ESA's JUICE, NASA's SOHO, and Parker's solar probe, each millions of kilometers apart, all recorded a pattern of in-phase noise. The noise wasn't random. It repeated periodically, like a piece of music being played from the plasma. The Brengwangen Rents to I'm, the Brengwangen Rek, and 1 man, 1%, and the Brengwangen Rek, the Brengwangen Rek, the Brengwangen Rek, the Brengwangen Rek, and at 1%, with a BI, JUICE, designed to study the Jupiter system, just happened to be at the ideal viewing angle to see 3I Atlas's aphelion. Its magnetic sensors detected a regular 33-second oscillation, a rhythm all too familiar. At the same time, SOHO recorded a faint streak of light appearing in the lower heliosphere, running parallel to Parker Solar Probe's path. And that is abraded for mind, and a dede, not to enslined, and a dede. Parker data revealed a rare phenomenon, a colder plasma region around 3I, Atlas's orbit, when it should have been hot. In other words, the object was absorbing heat instead of melting, a perfect paradox in an environment that is all about destruction. And there was hapset as some the scene H stays for one, and it supplied one, and the feege one read of a lies in proferficate. In the gram, ESA researchers asked, could 3I Atlas be converting energy, converting heat into electromagnetic or some other form of internal energy fluctuation? If so, it's not just enduring, it's learning to survive in the inferno. A NASA engineer wrote in the mission log, I saw a bright plasma region with an eerily quiet center. It was like meditating in the middle of the Sunday. No 1+4e. The spectral image from JUICE shows 3I Atlas has changed hue, from pure blue to a violet-hued blue, like a newly restructured plasma shell. No trace of disintegration, no debris, just an intact shape drifting out of the sun's bright light. Silently, steadfastly, as if never touched. This is server days, in Fermanith the Kansavim, 3 spacecraft, 3 independent systems, all confirmed the same thing. 3I Atlas had survived the sun's destruction window, and with that, it was no longer a comet, but something else. As the data from JUICE, SOHO, and Parker Solar Probe were pieced together, the world held its breath. No one could believe that the object, which was thought to disintegrate in minutes, had survived, leaving the heliosphere unscathed. Actually won. The first reconstructions showed 3I Atlas shrouded in a faint plasma halo, the light softer, quieter, like the ashes of a star that had not yet died. All the readings were contradictory. The surface temperature was low, but the energy output remained steady at high levels. Physicists called it the survivor signature, the trace of an object that had been through hell and back. That it is 7B live when we do dust things for the shamed today 2000 arms. In the control rooms, everyone just stared at the light graph. No one said a word. A strange feeling spread, not fear, but awe, because in that journey, 3I Atlas not only passed through the fire, but also through human understanding of matter and existence. A young scientist at ESA whispered, "It's like a starseed, a small piece of the universe testing its survival." To Seth, in the last Erkand and foreseed withend, where wonders fanders, to Sefend, to CS, and de lasters, and formand. The phrase spread throughout scientific forums. Starseed testing its survival, a metaphor both beautiful and unsettling. Because if it is truly adaptive, if that structure can mutate to survive, then the concept of nature, as humans have known it, may never have been large enough to contain it. Those Norman is action of the speaking at pasted relection, and the stage that dartivises sablik into justed it in one of the speaking with a speaking with a speaking of the speaking with a day, and a dartivises speaking of the speaking to the west, in the speaking of the ways of the justed is, and the speaking of the content, and all the ways, and so 3I Atlas continued to drift, leaving the sun behind, bringing with it a new light, no longer as dazzling as before, but deep, thick, and conscious. No one said it, But everyone understood that, from that moment, 3I ATLAS had stepped out of the world of comets. It became a witness to the endurance of the universe. That know that just in self and that to our counts and hound. In the darkness that was gradually returning, that light still moved, not fast, not slow, as if thinking, and somewhere, in the silence of space, the universe had just witnessed something unprecedented. A star particle,